It is Wednesday, April 14th here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the 29th Quick Hit Pod in our Dynasty Prospect Scouting Report series. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jaret Smola. You can now find 35 rookie scouting reports on DraftSharks.com. Every single one of those is free to read, and they will keep on coming right up until the NFL Draft. You can check out every one of our accompanying podcasts by subscribing to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel, as well as any of our podcast feeds. Our focus today is on Buffalo running back Jaret Patterson. Patterson topped 2,000 yards rushing and scored 23 touchdowns on the ground as a high school senior in Maryland, but he still barely got a look as a two-star recruit. According to 247 Sports, Buffalo was actually the only place to offer him a scholarship, and he got that, at least in part, maybe completely, because his twin brother James Patterson, who was a linebacker recruit, much more highly sought after, he said the only way that he was going anywhere was if that program also took little brother Jaret. They each had to take a red shirt their first year at Buffalo. James didn't have to, but Jaret had to enable them in order to make the team because Buffalo only had that many scholarships remaining. James Patterson said he gray shirted, which is what Buffalo calls it, that year, so that they could start together. Once they did start in 2018, Jaret Patterson stood out right away. Split carries evenly with classmate Kevin Marks, but averaged 5.5 yards per carry versus 4.7 for Marks. Caught only 7 passes that season, though, trailing Marks and ranking 9th on his own team. 2019, again, as a redshirt sophomore, Patterson outcarried Marks 312 to 227. It was a run-heavy team. 50.7 rushes per game total for Buffalo versus 21.4 pass attempts per game. Patterson averaged 5.8 yards per carry versus Marks' 4.6, scored 19 of the team's 36 rushing touchdowns that season. His receiving usage also picked up 13 catches, which isn't a huge total, but 8.7% share of the team total. Again, run-heavy offense, so a little bit better than it might seem just from the raw catch total. Last season, Buffalo played just 7 games because everything got shortened or canceled by COVID. Patterson missed one of those games with a knee sprain, played in the other 6. He averaged 23.5 carries per contest in those 6 games, racked up 1,072 total rushing yards, 19 touchdowns at 7.6 yards per rush, didn't catch a single pass in those 6 games, did, however, put up games of 301 and 409 rushing yards against Bowling Green and Kent State, respectively. Patterson's 178.7 yards per game on the ground led all of FBS for 2020.
Yeah, that's been a dominant running game they've had at UB. PFF had UB as the number 1 run blocking line in all of college football last season. So that obviously, boosted Patterson's numbers. As you have been mentioning, though, he outproduced classmate Kevin Marks. And really, Patterson fared really well in some of the PFF stuff. PFF had him 15th in their rushing grades among 238 qualifiers last year. He was 8th among those 238 in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was 6th in yards after contact per attempt. I do think the level of competition, we'll get to that, probably helped him. But still, those are good blocking independent marks that Patterson put up last season.
Yeah, it undoubtedly helped him. But as you would expect from those kind of numbers, Jaret Patterson is fun to watch. And we'll turn on the highlights here. We'll talk about what he showed on tape. Like I said, Patterson's fun to watch. He has the vision to find openings and look ahead for approaching defenders, set up his moves, set up those defenders. There's impressive balance through contact, especially when you know that he's a small guy going in. He really runs like Devin Singletary from a couple years ago. I loved Devin Singletary on his college tape heading into the NFL. Certainly hasn't been awesome since then. But Singletary, I thought, looked like a superior talent versus Conference USA defenders on that tape from Florida Atlantic. I think similarly, Patterson looks superior versus the MAC defenders. And that's the question that pops up, I guess, is the NFL is obviously going to be different than facing MAC defenders.
I love that Singletary comp. I hadn't thought of it. There's some speed deficiency to both guys. I think we can get into that with Patterson as well. But yeah, he's a fun watch. He's small. He's 5'7", but he's 195. And he's pretty, as you can see, pretty well built. Like I have less size concerns for him than I do with like Javion Hawkins. The jump cuts Patterson has on tape are sweet. He strings them together. He has plays where he's like jump cut to get to the outside. He, at least against MAC defenders, had enough speed to break long runs. I think that his 40 time was disappointing in that regard. But again, as I mentioned with UB's run blocking, Patterson had some massive holes to run through. A lot of his long runs were easy. He was just untouched, got into the second level, and was able to break free. So definitely a fun watch. But again, got to take into account the O-line and also the competition he was facing.
Yeah, and that competition is the thing. He's not going to outquick or outrun NFL linebackers the way he did MAC linebackers. And he's smaller than Singletary, 10 pounds lighter. I'm not sure if he's any faster. So I think that he's going to have trouble transferring any long speed to the league. Spinning ahead to the fantasy outlook, like Javian Hawkins, I think Jaret Patterson is the kind of player that you hope will do well. I hope that he does better in the NFL than what I'm expecting, but he's small and he's slow. And I mean, you can have agility in the hole, but that's just not a good combo for NFL success. And we're not looking for guys that are going to stick on an NFL roster, which I think Jaret Patterson can do. We're looking for guys that carry some ultimate fantasy upside. We want the next James Robinson, not the next Peyton Barber.
Yeah, 4.66 40 time for Devin Singletary, by the way. It was a 4.58 for Jaret Patterson at a pro day. I know there's always some adjustments, so their speed's probably similar. Yeah, guys like Patterson coming from somewhere like UB, the pro day, the athletic measurements are always a bit more important to me. And again, Patterson disappointed there with the 4.58 40 at just 195 pounds, gave him a well below average speed score. He had a 7th percentile vertical, 40th percentile broad jump, 27th percentile short shuttle. That's surprising when you see the agility on film. He was 55th percentile in the 3-cone, but overall a below average athleticism score for Jaret Patterson. You have that, you have the size. He's undersized. He's not. I don't think he's too small for the NFL, but it's not going to be something working in his favor. Again, I mentioned the schedule. So first of all, if you've ever watched any MAC games, there's not much defense played in that conference. They're fun games to watch because they're all 55 to 45 final scores. But the 6 defenses that Patterson faced last year, here were their finishes in rushing yards allowed per game: 74th, 21st, 127th, which by the way was dead last, 123rd, 120th, and 31st. So he faced a lot of bad defenses playing behind a great offensive line. So that definitely takes some of the shine off the rushing production. And then you have the pretty disappointing passing game production. 0 targets last year is kind of tough to settle.
Yeah, that's a big issue. You mentioned that the size is not too small to play in the NFL, but I do think he's at the size where you have to have something else special about you to make up for that size. And I think that's what he lacks. The lack of receiving, it really bothers me. Just 20 receptions across 3 seasons at Buffalo. That's 1 fewer catch than A.J. Dillon had at Boston College, for example. And even in high school, Patterson had 14 catches as a junior, 113 receiving yards as a senior, from what I could find. So, even those are pretty small numbers for a guy who has starred both there and since then. Devin Singletary, had a bit of a receiving question coming out. He fell to 6 receptions his final season at Florida Atlantic, but he also totaled 51 catches there. So he even came in with more of a receiving profile than Patterson. So, ultimately, again, I hope Jaret Patterson does something because he's fun to watch, and he's been an underdog to this point and beating the odds, beating what people's expectations were for him. But just from a strictly, heartless fantasy outlook, he looks like a smaller version of Devin Singletary with no proven receiving upside. So I can't say that I'm interested.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And, Singletary was a 3rd-round pick. If Patterson goes in the 3rd round, then maybe you can, sort of put him in a similar tier as Singletary. I'd expect him to be like a 6th or 7th round pick. I'll be pleasantly surprised for him if he goes, before round 6.
Mm-hmm. Head over to DraftSharks.com now to read Kevin's full scouting report on Jaret Patterson. While you're there, check out the 34 other prospect scouting reports that we've already posted. Check back for more right up until the draft. Every single one of those is free to read, as I've mentioned, but you should lock in your DS Insider access. That way you can see where all these guys sit in our dynasty rankings right now. You can see our rookie rankings both before and after the NFL draft, and you can check out the 2021 projections, MVP draft board. They are all live, ready to help you draft in your best ball drafts right now. You can also find us on Twitter. We are at Draft Sharks. Jared is at Smola DS. I am at Schauf DS. That's SCHAUF. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.